Hi, good evening. This is week 4 of English 122. I'm Chris Moreno. We're down at Pikes Peak Community College. This is the online edition of English 122. I wanted to congratulate you. You've done a great job on your papers, Essay 1A. I'm looking through it. I'll get those grades back to you this week. I'll get 1B graded and back to you as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of this coming week, so you have that feedback. I wanted to congratulate you on your discussion post. You're doing a good job, and I want you to keep that up. So this week we're in the middle of our Module 1. Module 1 is a recursive review type of exercise. We're going through the components of writing an argument so that we can move into modules 2, 3, and 4, which is the meat of this course, which is the research paper, researched argument. So right now we've just finished on this Sunday, we have finished turning in basic composition. You got your feet wet with making an argument and supporting it. Moving to the next writing assignment, you'll be making a critical analytic argument. So you'll either be doing specifically rhetorical analysis or a critical analysis of a text. And we're adding another text this week to our reading, so you have a few more choices. This week's reading is Shitty First Drafts by Annie Lamont. We've also read Morgan Spurlock's Do You Want Lies with That, and we've read King's Letter from Birmingham Jail. For the critical analysis argument, I'll be posting a separate video detailing the nuts and bolts of that assignment and giving you some more options for textual choices for that analysis. So moving into this week, I wanted you to look at the think abouts. If you are following that PowerPoint, I update it weekly. This week we're looking at cohesion and purpose. The reason we're looking at cohesion is because cohesion is the thing that links an argument together from the intro paragraph all the way through to the so what, or even from the title through the so what, the works cited page even. So I want you to think about how something coheses together, is a cohesive unit. Coherence is another component part of that, but has a different nuanced meaning. We'll go through that in another think about. But this week we were looking at cohesion, how all the parts relate to the whole and holds together. And then purpose, thinking about in your writing as you're developing out your argument, as you're in the nuts and bolts of writing an argument, the body paragraphs doing the heavy lifting of making that argument, supporting it, you might find that your purpose changes as you go through working through your claims and evidence. So you might need to adjust your thesis based on that purpose. But try to keep your purpose in mind. What do you want your audience to do? So towards that, so what? Do you want them to think about something deeply? Do you want them to change? Do you want them to be proponents for change? Do you want them to take direct action in some way? So think about your purpose of writing this particular argument out, whether it's your basic argument or your critical analysis, your rhetorical analysis argument, or even your research project, your extended project coming up. So those are going to be under the think abouts. We'll flesh those out a little more on the PowerPoint for your reference this week. So this week, week 4, we're looking at paragraph function, structure, development, and then we'll look at invention and techniques of invention. I will put an additional reading up, the techniques of invention. It's a very short, little detailed component. It's like notes on what invention is. But we'll start with the paragraph function, structure, and development. Now, some of the OER readings that I've given you about paragraphs are thin, as you're finding some of the OER readings are. And so if you're not finding the information relevant, just skim through it. Don't do the exercises that are listed there unless you want to for your own purposes. They're not going to be graded. They're just there for reference. But there are some OER readings that I'm finding particularly enlightening. And one of them is specific called Developing Relationships Between Ideas, that looks especially at transitions. Transitions going back to cohesion. Transitions are the things that link your argument together and gives it unity and strength. So we want to look at that a lot when we're looking at the different types of paragraphs. So basically a paragraph function, paragraphs are the building blocks that you put together to support your thesis and your thesis point. the foundation of an argument. So if you think about an argument as a house, a lot of times people use that metaphor. You want to make sure that your building blocks are strong enough to support the entire house, not just a little bit here, a little bit there. You don't want to have a great garage but the rest of the house falls apart. You don't want to have a strong basement and nothing on top. You don't want to have a roof that collapses down. So you want to look at the paragraph function. Every paragraph works in unity to hold that whole argument together. When we're looking at paragraph structure, there are three primary types of paragraphs in an argument. The first one is the introductory paragraph, and it has specific functions, and we'll go through that. The body paragraphs, they also have specific functions, and then your conclusion paragraph has its own specific function as well. So we'll look at those three types. Looking into developing a paragraph, and then we'll go into invention. Developmental paragraphs. You want to contextualize the problem that the thesis responds to. So you want to look at what an introduction paragraph does. So we're going to start with intros. Intros, you have a hook. You want to hook the interest of your audience. So you need to know who your audience is, or imagine who the audience should be or might be. You want to keep them in mind as you contextualize the problem that your thesis responds to, or that your thesis is attempting to join a conversation about. And then in the intro, you also want to set out your thesis. So an intro paragraph, that's what the development structure should look like for that intro paragraph. Then you're going to transition into your body paragraphs. Transitions do several things. They thread or link your ideas together. They try to structure, they're the cement, the glue, the mortar that holds the bricks together for your structure. If you have a jarring transition, if it doesn't make sense, if it's abrupt, your argument will lose momentum and strength. So you want to look at your transitions. What are they doing? So some of the traditional ways to do a transition: signposting. First, second, third, in conclusion. However, but, in addition. So those are prepositional phrases, signposts that you might use at the beginning of your body paragraph to transition into that new idea. Then unify each of your thesis points. So going back to what we were talking about last week about thesis points, a thesis has complexity, has a lot of elements to it. It shouldn't just be flat. So if you are developing out those thesis points, you want to make sure that each thesis point you develop within each body paragraph. So each of those discrete points build together to complete your entire thesis. It sounds like at that point, it sounds like you're a huge ball of a thesis, and it shouldn't really feel that bulky, but your thesis points, each discrete point will go to build together into that thesis to prove and support that thesis. So we want to look at, excuse me, so the body paragraphs, we talked about the intros, I'm going to go into the body paragraph. So you start with the transition to that new idea, to that new thesis point. A body paragraph should have a topic sentence. That topic sentence should signal to your reader, this paragraph is going to explain this topic that relates specifically to this thesis point. So as you're threading through, if you're skeleton outlining, a thesis point is what that paragraph is about. Topic sentence is what that paragraph is about. So you can interchange those terms, but a topic sentence is specific to that thesis point. A thesis point can have several paragraphs about it. So that topic sentence could be the same as your thesis point, or a thesis point could have multiple topic sentences and multiple paragraphs about it. Then you move into the claims and evidence. One thing I want you to really identify and stress is don't allow your evidence to be your topic sentence. It is disastrous if you invert a paragraph this way, because then you let your evidence try to do speaking for you, and you allow your evidence to speak for itself, and you allow your evidence to take over your argument, and then you don't have your own proof for that argument, and then you have nowhere to go. So make sure that your evidence stays as evidence. It doesn't creep into your topic sentence at all. So your topic sentence, fully your voices, is what I'm arguing in this paragraph. Then you move into the claims and evidence. A topic sentence can control that paragraph. A paragraph can have one claim, can have multiple claims. The topic sentence could be that claim, just as a topic sentence could be the thesis point. But generally, you want to give your reader a chance to say, this is where we're going next. I'm orienting my reader. And then you bring in the claim that is supporting your thesis point. You want to bring in evidence to support that point. The thing about evidence is you don't want it to speak for itself. You must interpret it out. You must tell your reader what they are supposed to do with that piece of evidence. Then you work through that paragraph that's commanded by that topic sentence. If you have more claims and more evidence to bring in to support that topic sentence, to support that thesis point, great. If not, then you want to transition out. And you don't want to end your paragraph with somebody else's words. You don't want to end with evidence because you haven't interpreted it out. You also have a jarring transition to your next point because your reader is left with someone else's supporting information. So either data or a quote that they need to have interpreted out for them. And then you need to take them one more step to say, as this point demonstrates this idea, boom, my next paragraph is demonstrating this. You want to create a link in a way. So moving into your next shift to your new thesis point, to your next paragraph or your next sequence of paragraphs to prove that thesis point. One way to look at it is to identify either a forward or a backward looking sentence that links those paragraphs together. Some people call that meta discourse, which is where you're talking outside of the nuts and bolts of working through a claims evidence. If you then anticipate saying, just as we see, for example, just as we see in this paragraph, X, Y, and Z, so too we will see in the following paragraphs, A, B, and C. And then you've given that springboard, so you're transitioning here to here to here to here. So you're making that link like a chain. Conclusion paragraph is when you're done with all of your work. There is no new evidence you're going to bring in. You've already done all the heavy lifting with proving and evidence. So no new claims, no new evidence. No evidence, no claims in your conclusion paragraph because you're just finishing up. I'm concluding. A conclusion paragraph recontextualizes the information, the problem that you're arguing, your thesis. You're restating your thesis. It doesn't have to be an exact restatement. It can be a shorthanded element of it. It can be a tweaking of it in some way. It can be doubling down. And then you're turning over responsibility to your audience. You're giving them the so what. What do you need them to do with this information that you've just given them, that you've argued out? What do you want them to do with that? The so what. Why does your argument matter? So that's the general gist of a paragraph in an argument essay. Intro, body paragraphs, conclusion. They all have discrete things that they do. I want to remind you again, don't bring evidence into your conclusion. New claims do not belong in your conclusion because you're concluding. You're not still arguing. They also don't belong in your intro. Your intro is just telling somebody, hey, welcome in, this is where we're going. If you give them evidence, if you give them a claim, you're confusing them. You want to keep those claims and evidence body paragraph only. I want to remind you one way to think about developing out an argument. You can reverse outline, and one of the topics under OER, under revision, is to reverse outline. I'll show you how to do that reverse outlining. It's a really important way to look at, do you have sequential reasoning and logical progression through your argument, or do you have gaps in the reasoning that you need to account for? It helps you to decide whether you need to adjust your thesis. Don't throw your whole paper out because your thesis doesn't align with what you've done. If you've done a lot of really good, strong work in body paragraphs, then you can go back and adjust your thesis to reflect the information that you've argued out. It may just be changing a word or two. It may just be reversing an order in how you're presenting your thesis. But reverse outline can really help you with that, looking for the gaps in your logic, flaws in reasoning, progression, transitions. That'll help. The other thing is, again, read your paper out loud. I made a point of saying silly things like read it out loud in a dialect or some accent that is foreign to you. That's very helpful because you will hear the transitional flaws. So another thing I wanted to bring your attention to about the OER readings today, I mentioned earlier in this video about developing the relationships between ideas. That helps you with the transitions. You want to really understand how transitions are going to be helping. So going back to how I always see writing in analogies and metaphors. So I learn best through analogy, and I try to teach through analogy because that's how I learn best. So one way I think about an intro paragraph is as a treasure map. I like to locate the argument. So think of it, what a map does is locate somebody in time and place. Sometimes you also give them the lay of the land. So geographical, this is a mountain, this is a valley, this is a creek. You want to orient your reader in that way. So the sport of orienteering, where you drop somebody off and say, here you go. You are giving your reader, here you go, you're dropped off. Let me give you the clues to find your way to X, just like a treasure map. You're giving them X, which is the thesis. You have to make sure that your thesis is of value to your reader, and that's where that purpose, audience, that connection between purpose, audience, author all comes into play. If the reader doesn't care about, or your audience doesn't care about this argument, they won't want to read, and they won't care about your treasure map because it's not a treasure to them. But if you give them something that's at stake to them, if you keep in mind your so what for them, then you've given them a sense of, this is so valuable, I need to take you through these steps so you can get to this treasure. You want to give them a hook. Why do they want to be there? So I give an example of, if you're on the island of Tortuga, but you mean to be on Tortola, you better be able to locate your argument correctly, you better contextualize correctly. If you tell your reader that I'm going to take you to the treasure in 5 steps, and you take them wandering all over the place, and 20 steps later they're still not there, they're going to be impatient with you. So you need to give them some kind of clues about where we'll go. This is kind of where we're going in this argument. So that's kind of anticipating what you're going to do. You've seen that in high school writing, which is not a bad thing. I'm not trying to be disrespectful in any way, but you've seen that in writing. I'm going to talk about X, Y, and Z. And that's sometimes what you can do in your intro paragraph, to just locate your reader. So an intro locates your reader, gives them the reason, the lay of the land, the context, and the treasure that they're going to seek. You have to help them seek it. You have to give them reasons they want to seek it. And you have to understand your reader enough to make them understand that this is relevant to them. One way to start out an intro paragraph, you'll see several different suggestions. You've seen this if you remember the From Inquiry to Academic Writing text, is to ask a question. You can start your essay just right off the bat. What would you think if the world were purple? That might be a silly thing, but that's one way to get your reader's attention. Make them answer a question or think about a question. You can present a fact. 2.5% of all dogs have spots. Okay, well, if the reader doesn't care about dogs, but if the reader does care about dogs, I might be interested. I want to go into that argument. You can start with a quotation. You can see this very powerfully. If I say to you, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, says, Roosevelt. If then I'm talking about something that's not related to that quote, well, what's the point of putting that quote in there? But if it's very relevant to what that quote is doing, if I'm joining the conversation that quote is responding to, then you use that quote effectively. Another thing is to do an anecdote or personal narrative. Once upon a time, this happened to me. It doesn't have to be once upon a time, but this happened to me. So this is a caution. So look about Morgan Spurlock. Remember how he starts in. He starts out with something very funny. Anecdotal even. He tells you about how silly these Americans are. They got in the bathtub with their blow dryers. They ate the silicone gels out of shoe packets. He goes into the anecdotal narrative very well. Very powerful beginning. Thinking about King's letter from Birmingham jail. My dear fellow clergymen, you're telling me that I'm unwise and I'm untimely. I'm going to show you exactly why I'm timely and wise by giving you pointers of time and reason all throughout this lengthy letter. So it's an interesting structural device too. So enough about intro paragraphs. Again, no evidence, no claims in your intro. Thinking about you're just orienting your reader. Body paragraphs. Think about cohesion. You're supposed to support your main thesis point. Your claims and evidence do the heavy work. I want you to remember to always interpret out your evidence. Tell your audience exactly what they need to do with it. If you need to break down that quote and just use ellipses to take a little bit of that quoted material, then use ellipses, but make sure you handle that quote so it's not speaking for you and that you don't allow somebody else's words to take over your argument. One way to think about a body paragraph, you can structure it by thinking about, you can do a comparing and a contrasting, and then you have two body paragraphs to do some work with. Cause and effect. Some arguments would, what is the cause of this? What is the effect of this? What are the solutions to that? Defining terms. If you are using an argument where you must define the terms where they're vague or maybe jargon specific to a field, if I'm going to be talking about ideologies to you and you don't know what I mean by that, I better define that term. And even if you think your audience may know a term, it doesn't hurt to define the term as you're using it. Simply put in a sentence, as I understand the term ideology, it means this, or as we refer to ideologies in this context, this is how I'm applying it. You can recognize that there are multiple definitions. You can put in a direct quote from a dictionary, and we'll talk about that later as we go into the research. One of your research sources can be a dictionary entry so that you can understand how that word is specifically used in your argument. One thing that you can pepper through, and I like to use the word peppering, when you're peppering things throughout your argument, you're decorating in some way, but one way to keep cohesion throughout and coherence throughout your argument in a body paragraph is to echo words. So that helps with transitions where you use one word in the former paragraph, the same word echoed in this topic sentence of your next paragraph. Or you can use echoing strategies where you're using a thematic idea between one thing and a next within a body paragraph itself. Thinking about Morgan Spurlock's consumption, he's talking about don't eat this, don't overeat that, and then he talks about buying. It's a different form of consuming something. So he plays with the thematic idea of consumption. We want to talk about thematic words and repetitions. You don't want to use the same word over and over and over and over because it bores your reader and it also makes them feel like, well, you're speaking down to me. You don't have control of language. So don't hesitate to go back into your writing. I always put like a little star or something that I can go back and quickly do a search for in the Word document. So I can go back and say, I need to find a different word for that. But it can be a placeholder as you're writing for the moment. So going back and looking for those repetitions, I can say dog, I can say canine, I can say Fido, I can say Rex, I can say my favorite pet, my least favorite pet. However, I'm going to argue it out. You don't have to use the same word exactly, but you can use that same idea throughout to control the cohesion of that body paragraph. Then finally, the conclusion paragraph, again with my analogy, I think about conclusion paragraphs are a dinner check. Like when you're done eating a great meal or even a crappy meal, when you're done eating it, you just want to leave. You're done. So what do? You ask for the check. And what are you anticipating to see on the check? Is where you've been, what you've eaten, what you've consumed, what's been down there. And what's the cost? How much will this cost me? So thinking about where you are. I am in this restaurant and I'm sitting with these people and this is the meal I've had. It is, I'm sitting in a Parisian cafe with my best beloved at dusk in April. And we've had a beautiful bottle of wine and we've had some delicious moule frites. And how much is going to cost us? 2,000 American dollars is what it's going to cost us. I might scream like, oh, I can't pay that. But if it's a reasonable cost, I'm willing to pay that. If the waiter, waitress brings me, a server brings me the check, like, you know what? That was a really valuable meal to me. Then you've given a great so what. Another way to think about it is contextualize. You want to recontextualize. Where are you? Where is this argument coming from? You're anticipating having your reader take responsibility for the argument next. So you want to give them a sense that they are possibly joining a conversation or will be. You want to give them a summation, but not a summary. So you want to say, hey, you've had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You want to say you had eggs, and I put some salt, I put some pepper, I put some chives in there. That's recursive. You don't need to remind them all of those things, but give them a quick summation. You had a breakfast, and its cost is this. You want to restate your thesis, which is kind of what you had. This is the thesis, this is the argument that you've just enjoyed, that you've consumed, you've read, you've consumed, you've thought about it. And the cost is the so what. How much will this cost your reader? What do you want to charge them for being in your argument? What do you want to charge them to do next? You want them to think, act, to change, to join a conversation, to never care about something again. Whatever you want them to do, you want to make that cost. So that's how I understand about body paragraphs, intro paragraphs, conclusion paragraphs, the whole thing together to support and prove your thesis. I want you to think about, again, no evidence in the conclusion and intro, and you want to put the implication of your argument in your so what. What is the point of your argument? So then we're going to move into invention next, and then be finished. Excuse me just a moment.